peut-être quelques mots en introduction pour présenter William Kentridge et Denis Hirson, donc nos invités d'honneur. Euh, je laisserai Denis Hirson présenter davantage William Kentridge puisqu'il a prévu un texte pour l'occasion, un texte qui est issu de leur livre qui paraît aux éditions Dilecta actuellement, À pas de panthère, qui est un livre qui leur permet de revenir sur différentes conversations qu'ils ont pu mener au travers des années, puisque William Kentridge et Denis Hirson se sont rencontrés dans les années 80 et autour du théâtre, et leur rencontre s'est enrichie à la fois de l'empreinte littéraire de Denis Hirson et du travail visuel et des arts visuels de William Kentridge. Mais peut-être que je peux tout simplement laisser Denis Hirson vous présenter davantage William Kentridge pour ceux qui ne le connaîtraient pas. Merci.
Oui, bonsoir. Merci d'être là. Merci aux organisateurs du festival FILAF, notamment à Rachel Simon et à Henri Guette de nous avoir invités à faire cette conversation ici. Je ne sais pas, je suis constamment frustré par le manque de renommée de William Kentridge ici en France. Je voulais juste lire le premier paragraphe en français de ce livre avant qu'on ne commence la conversation, si vous voulez bien. William Kentridge est né en 1955 à Johannesbourg. Il vit toujours, connu pour ses films d'animation, ses mises en scène d'opéra, de spectacles et de performances. C'est l'un des artistes les plus célèbres dans le monde de l'art contemporain. Il utilise de multiples moyens d'expression, parmi lesquels le dessin, la gravure, les collages, la sculpture et la tapisserie. Il a produit plusieurs opéras, Le Retour d'Ulysse de Monteverdi, La Flûte enchantée de Mozart, L'Aîné de Shostakovich, ainsi que Lulu et Wozzeck de Berg. Au théâtre, il a réalisé des productions originales telles que Ubu and the Truth Commission, en collaboration avec the Handspring Puppet Company et The Head and the Load. Sa peinture murale Triumphs and Laments a été créée en 2016 sur une berge du Tibre à Rome. Par ailleurs, il a transformé ses conférences en performances théâtrales et ça continue et ça termine par, par le prix, un des plus importants prix mondiaux qui a été décerné à William Kentridge en 2019 à Tokyo, le Premium impérial de peinture. Pour la suite, vous pouvez lire dans ce livre. William, et puis j'espère bien que vous allez pouvoir nous suivre en anglais, puisque c'est notre langue maternelle à tous les deux. Donc, s'il y a des problèmes au niveau linguistique, vous pouvez me l'indiquer. Je peux vous traduire en français, ou j'espérais, ou je vais essayer, d'accord? William, good evening.
Dennis, lovely to be with you.
Yes, lovely to be with you.
Dommage, c'est pas possible de continuer en français. Mais...
Bravo, William.
Yes.
William, tell us where you are.
At the moment, I am in my sister's house in the Lake District in the north of England. So that's the view out the window. Beautiful trees and hills. So I'm not in my studio. I'm not in Johannesburg. I am in England.
Okay, and I am in a cinema in the middle of the beautiful town of Perpignan in the south of France, where I've never been before and I'm delighted to discover now. So we're going to have this evening potentially 3 films, but we will start with one, which is Waiting for the Sibyl. And
Okay.
While I was preparing this conversation, I thought that the audience really needed to be prepared for the richness of this film. So perhaps I could ask you to say a few words about the making of it.
Well, the film that you're going to see is, as it were, taken out of the heart of a chamber opera that was made called Waiting for the Sibyl. This is an opera which was done, a chamber opera made for Rome, opera in Rome, but performed in Luxembourg last week and will be performed in other cities in due course. It's an opera written for 2 dancers, an actor, and 6 singers. And what we see in the film is the book of the Sibyl. Should I explain maybe the story of the brief story of the Sibyl?
Go ahead.
Okay. So the principal story of the Sibyl was this prophetess, this classical prophetess who lived outside of Naples. And you would go to the prophetess with a question: how long will I live? What will happen to me? Will I die of COVID? Will I not? What is the future? What is my life going to be? And you would write your question on an oak leaf. And then you would go to the mouth of the cave where the Sibyl lived to collect your answer. But as you reached for your leaf in the pile of leaves, a wind would blow up, so that you never knew if you were getting your leaf, your future, and your fate, or someone else's fate. So the principle of the opera took this image of leaves turning, and in this case leaves gathered, leaves as pages of a book, and gathered together in a book. So the phrases which are in the film are phrases gathered from different poets from different parts of the world in translation. I'm sorry that we don't have a French translation to help those for whom the reading of the English is less easy. So there isn't a narrative in them, but there's an arc. There is a question about how much can we know or not know of ourselves and the future.
And the film that we're going to see is actually shown during the chamber opera.
Yes, so what you see on the left-hand page, here is a drawing and sometimes a text. In the opera, what you see on the left-hand page is the shadow of the dancer in front of the book. So you see you have a book which is half projected and half a shadow thrown on it. But in this film version, obviously, it's all just drawings and text.
Yes, we should explain to the audience that what they're going to see is a film of a book.
Yes. So there've been many. It started with the idea of a flip book, when you would have 80 pages and you'd flip a book with your thumb, and you would see a 1 second movement in that little book. Someone falling off a bicycle, a person kicking a soccer ball, but one moment or one gesture. And this, in effect, is a flip book, but with 1,500 pages, not with 20 or 30 pages. And so obviously you couldn't literally flip the pages, but they filmed as if you are looking at a flip book. So to make the film, there are, in fact, I think 1,500 individual paintings or drawings or texts made, so piles of pages in the studio.
Now, you describe this, what we're going to see, as the libretto for your chamber opera. But did you make the film before you made the opera, at the same time, afterwards? How did it work?
Okay, so the way I'd made other films in books, much shorter ones, simpler ones. And so the form of the book I had done already, but what was new was this understanding of the pages as leaves, as fitting into a bigger story about the tree and the leaf and the turning of the leaves. What we did first was we took one of the existing books and said, what does it look like if we have a shadow projected on a book? So I would have, in our first workshop, we'd have gathered the musicians, a dancer, a costume designer, a set designer, and we'd all meet in my studio in Johannesburg for 10 days. And during this period, experiment with many different scenes and forms. And one of the 12 scenes that we did was the scene with the book. And so to do it initially, we had a dancer, and we angled a projector such that her shadow filled the page of the book, and projected the book, which at that stage was one of the older books, not a Sibyl book, and saw how interesting her shadow could be on the book. And then it was a question, once that was done, there was another several-month gap. And in that gap, what I did is go through many, many books of mainly poetry, but also books of proverbs, other texts, and underline or write out ones that were interesting to me, or intriguing rather than interesting, which I couldn't answer. What does it mean to say, wait once again for better gods? Or what does it mean to say, God's opinion is unknown? Or something has been postponed? And I had all these pages in a book. Then they all got written out again and cut up. So I then had maybe 300 pieces of paper, sheets of paper, little ribbons, which I would then arrange on a table, almost at first randomly, and gradually start to place them in a possible order. And that became the first structure of it. And then that was filmed into a book, or first written out. And that was also given to the composer to think, well, are some of these lines going to be used by the singers in the music of the piece? But there's a bringing together of testing these out, the composer with his musicians testing out some songs, and the dancers seeing what movements will work and what the breath, what the breathing of the Sibyl can be together with the page turning.
Okay, I think c'est bon là. On peut voir le film. Vous n'êtes pas tout à fait assommé par. Ça va. Bon, on peut lancer le premier film. William,
Yeah. here I am. Good.
Pretty soon I want to give the floor to the audience because I really feel this piece is so rich and so beautiful. It's worth staying with for a while. I see lots of faces wide awake looking at it. But before I do that, I just want to ask you to say a word about how you worked on the music for this piece, how the music evolved, how it came about.
Okay, so the music is written by in this version. It's written by Nhlanhla Mahlangu, who is a South African singer and composer. He's one of the performers as well as the composer, and he chose very specifically the singers that he worked with. For example, one of them is Ayanda, is a singer who is in training to become a sangoma. So there's a sense of a deep understanding of what it is to be a prophetess, to have that within you when you are allowing this voice to emerge. So that was a choice for her. Then he would have worked, he said, let's work with Xoli, who is the throat singer, which is a kind of singer that comes from the Transkei, where you sing a bit like Tibetan throat singing, where you can sing a chord and the voice gets very deep, and you're singing two notes at once, and say, let's have a voice that's not like the voice of the woman who's dancing the role of the Sibyl. So those were beginning points. But then I also said, let's listen to some very different kinds of music as a way of thinking. So we started with listening to some Stockhausen, a piece called Stimmung, which is a piece for four voices, for a cappella singing, but which it all happens on one note, B flat in the Stockhausen. And so I played it was a different kind of music for the singers and for Nhlanhla to hear. And we played it, and we started off with the singers simply copying what they heard on the recording of the Stimmung, which is different chords and different intonations. And then at a certain point, we'd fade out the recording of the Stockhausen, and then they would continue. And then very soon there would be different rhythms, different shifts and changes, and it would shift from being a piece of music from Germany in the 1980s to being something that's very much inflected and infected by being in Johannesburg. In South Africa, there's a very strong choral tradition. Competitions between school choirs are as strongly fought over as sporting competitions between schools. So there's a very deep understanding and practice of choral and also a cappella, unaccompanied singing. And so starting with the Stockhausen kind of music as one element, which comes through at different points in the piece, I then started finding other more lyrical lines which Nhlanhla had. And we started very much four-part harmony, and at a certain point he said, let's see what happens if we get Zandi, who is the beautiful soloist in the last section of the film, to put a vocal line above what everyone else is singing. So it's a very organic way. It's not as if Nhlanhla goes away and writes a piece of music and then gives it to the singers and they learn the piece and they rehearse it and perform it. It's a construction by the singer under his direction, kind of in real time. And then we record sections and it's reworked and it's redone, and there's discussions between all the singers about, if you sing this note, I'll go down below here and then rejoin you in the next part. We sing three cycles in this way. And then what for me was a very beautiful discovery was saying, let's keep the melodic line, but do it in speech rather than singing. So there's a section where everybody is talking in pitch. So it's spoken but at a very exact pitch, which is for me a very beautiful part of the music that was developed.
Okay. Just let me say a word to the audience and then I'm going to pass the microphone around. Donc, je voudrais souligner, il s'agit d'un opéra de 40 minutes divisé en 6 parties autour du Sibylle, cette prophétesse qui prophétise avec des feuilles de chêne, comme vous avez vu dans le film. Et ce film est projeté pendant l'opéra et sur quelques pages, on voit l'ombre de la femme qui danse, qui est la prophétesse, et donc l'ombre de sa danse rejoint les images que vous venez de voir. Si jamais je pouvais, je vous mettrais sur scène maintenant cet opéra, parce que c'est une des plus belles choses à voir en ce moment, à mon avis. Voilà. Et peut-être que ça va venir à France, je vous souhaite la possibilité d'aller le voir. Maintenant, est-ce que vous voulez déjà poser quelques questions? Oui, allez-y.
Directement? Hi. Hello. Can you tell us something about the rhythm of the images of the drawing you made, and is there a special rhythm, a succession of meanings between the words you wrote on the pages, or is it by random?
Okay, that's the question. How planned are the relationship to images and text? It's both. So there's a series of drawings of objects, silhouettes of objects, charcoal drawings, a jug, different objects that you see, as well as trees and leaves, portraits of a sibyl. So we had all these drawings which I would draw, and then almost at random photograph, and then with the editor start to see what is the rhythm, what is the speed. Do we need to see 3 of that drawing to register it? Is 1 enough? How long do we need to see a text? And it didn't have to do with carefully working out this drawing means this drawing corresponds to that phrase, but knowing that at this point we want to see the head of the sibyl, and then it can be rubbed out. At this point we want the shadow of the figure of the sibyl turning. Later on we want to be more in the tree. So it's not random, it's not n'importe quoi, but it's not planned either. It's in the moment, saying that when looking at it in the editing table, in the montage, is this right, or does it feel right, or does it feel too stretched? So there was a lot of editing that happened, but in quite an unthinking way, or an unanalytic way. Not unthinking, but unanalytical. So it's saying there should be a kind of thinking which can recognize when something feels appropriate, but that's not the same as knowing in advance what that will be.
Can you just develop briefly the idea that we talk about in one of our conversations of fortuna?
Yes, so fortuna I would describe as the process of working. And normally one thinks of two extremes. The one would be where something is carefully planned in advance, it's thought out in your head in advance, and then you carry out your thought. You've written the program and you carry out the program of drawings, that's one. And the other is one of randomness, where you take the text and you just throw them in the air and you put them down as they appear, a kind of aleatoric way of working, which Stockhausen used a lot and which John Cage used a lot. It's a different kind of thing, and this is not that either. This is definitely has a different thinking. And this is about believing that if you have all these different elements around you, the vocabulary, the images, the texts, when you put them together, there's a part of you which knows what it's doing, which will make the decisions, even if you can't at the time justify why this text should be there. In other words, it's a thinking, before rational analysis. And this I would call the fortuna, the fortune which enables the work to appear. If I had to write the text in advance, it would always be more stupid than the text which is done by allowing the text to do the thinking. If I had to say, let me write a script, the script is always very dull, in my case. Some people write a beautiful script and they just need to make the script, but I know temperamentally for me that it will always be a bad script.
You have never wanted a storyboard?
I've wanted a storyboard, but the storyboards that I've made are always so banal and so terrible that I've always said, no, I will draw anything else but not the storyboard. I would love there to be a good, clear storyboard. And when I put the text out, I'm hoping they will arrange themselves into a good sense. But I have to take as much as they will offer. So I knew it was going to end with "to what end," because it's nice to end a film. You always end a film with "the end." So to bring the word "end" as the last word felt right. And then there was the one phrase about "wait once again for better gods," which is where we are now. You know, all the current things that we hold on to and hang on to have been shown to be so ephemeral and unstable in the world that we hope for better gods and for better people. And that means let's start right at the beginning with a script about, heaven is talking in a foreign tongue. We no longer believe in what we used to believe. This film was made long before COVID, but nonetheless, we understand in this COVID era that so many things we took for granted, we were so certain about, now don't justify that certainty. That we're in a much more precarious, uncertain world than we had hoped.
Thank you, William. Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions? William, just say one word, because once again you provoked a little bit of laughter with the text, "Beware of insects with moustaches." I myself laughed when I first read this, but when you told me the explanation, it wasn't so funny at all.
Well, there are different phrases that come from. All the best phrases in the piece are not mine. They're found, they're scavenged. I'm like a hyena picking up bones from other people's careful writing and brilliance. So the line about "beware of insects with moustaches" comes from a poem by the Russian poet Evgeny Yevtushenko. And it was a reference in the 1970s or early 80s when he was writing. There was a lot of control of dissidents in the Soviet Union, as it was then, by putting dissidents into mental asylums, by claiming they were mentally unstable. And so they were not put into a prison, but into a kind of prison which was a mental asylum. And apparently, as I read in the notes to the poem, when they were being interrogated for this, interrogated by psychiatrists, not by policemen or by policemen who were psychiatrists, one of the questions asked of these people was, "Do you see insects with moustaches?" And it was unclear if you did see insects with moustaches, you were mad and needed to go to an asylum, or if you didn't see insects with moustaches, you needed to be put in the asylum. But at any rate, this image of an insect, of a cockroach with a beautiful waxed moustache, struck me as an absurd but compelling image. It's both ridiculous, but it still holds you with its very specific image. Also, the phrase, which I think comes from Miloš, the Czech poet Miloš, of avoid frenzied actions on behalf of homeless cats.
Yes.
So it's taken out of a poem and it just floats in the air, and you immediately, when you read it, I think the provocation is when you read a line like that is, what could it possibly mean? What world am I in? How does it fit together? And that keeps you on your toes mentally when you're watching it the whole time. It might mean rather than it does mean.
Thank you, William. I think we'll go for the second film now, okay?
Yep.
On peut lancer le deuxième film, s'il vous plaît? Ce film est tiré du site web de William. Je vous incite à aller vous y référer, Kentridge.studio. William?
Yeah, here I am.
Tell us about the making of that film.
So, at the Centre for the Less Good Idea, which you saw on the screen, is a small art centre which exists in the centre of Johannesburg, in downtown Johannesburg, which brings together artists and actors and musicians and choreographers to work together on making projects. It's been going for about 5 years, but last year during the first lockdown, it was obviously impossible for people to get together in the same way. Everybody was locked in their own houses. So the centre started one of many different projects which we made during this time, and this was an invitation for artists to make a film of 1 minute duration that could be filmed on their phone, that could be sent by Instagram and shown on Instagram as a way of keeping contact. And over the course of 3 months, I think we showed one every day, so there were 100 or 120 different 1 minute films by mainly South African artists, but also by maybe 20 artists from different corners of the world. And I kind of got very interested in it and made several 1 minute films. They're all made in, give yourself an afternoon or an hour to make a film. So they're this was testing out almost like, can something be done in your hand? Every time you open your hand, there's a new object, which might be matches or fire or a mandarin or a so it kind of is about what are the random thoughts that go through one's head. It's kind of all of these are tracking, not just also the overload of different thoughts that pass through our head every moment. Things we remember, things we've seen, things we've just forgotten and should remember. A phrase that we've seen, something we catch from the corner of our eye. I mean, when I'm sitting here now, I'm seeing 3 photographs of cats that my sister has in this room, a small tree with little oranges on it, a book about tapestry, some hand sanitizer, a mirror and a curtain with clothes. I mean, these are all the things that are here just in 1 second around while thinking of the conversation that we're having. So the film is about trying to capture some of that overload.
Yes. And there is just that one deeper statement about when you're dead and in need of tenderness. You think that comes out of the coronavirus?
I think it does. I mean, there's both that little eraser with the pins in it that's like a coronavirus itself. When one is dead and needs tenderness. There's obviously in this last year, there was a lot of thinking about mortality and breathing and mortality. There was both the situation that everyone in the world was in with COVID, but there was also this huge movement that traversed many parts of the world that came, out of the Black Lives Matter and the death of Floyd in the United States. So those things kind of came together in saying this is a period of considering mortality and particularly premature mortality which comes too early. And in a way it's saying, yes, when you are dead and need tenderness, obviously it's a kind of an opposite. It's before we are dead we need tenderness. But if you know that even when you are dead there is tenderness towards you, that's a comfort to those not yet dead. In anticipation. I think this is an interpretation of that line which I don't completely understand, but I think that's what holds you when there's a riddle that you can't quite solve, which is at the edge of being solved. Something you can almost remember, you've just forgotten it. That's what holds you in the words, I think.
Est-ce qu'il y a des questions de la salle maintenant? William, I am struck once again by the way in which you mention all the things around you as potential resources. You do not stop going at all. And when I met you in Luxembourg 2 weeks ago, not only did you have a major exhibition, but in addition you had the performance we've just talked about, Waiting for the Sibyl. You gave a masterclass, and then in addition to that, and I don't know what else, you were also preparing a piece on Shostakovich.
Right.
and I don't understand where you get this energy from. Can you explain to us, because we all need it, you know?
Yeah. I think for many years, for decades now, an important part of my practice is working with other collaborators, so working with people in the opera world, with costume designers, set designers, lighting, and in a lot of the work with video editors, with composers. And there's an energy that comes that we will all recognize. Sometimes you're having a conversation with a friend, and as the conversation develops, it heats up. And you can feel the energy of thoughts, of new ideas emerging in the physical act of talking. Often it goes with the physical act of walking, being in motion, and thoughts start to emerge. And at a certain point, you can feel ideas bubbling faster than you can explain them. And for me, it's always almost like sweating under your armpits. You feel it in your pectoral muscles. It's sometimes there behind your taste buds, this energy of thinking, the thinking that's happening. And I think that for me has been a key thing, the energy that comes from collaboration, from not being on your own, from thinking with other people, of giving every idea the benefit of the doubt. Let's see what happens. With the Shostakovich, which is a piece to make a film to go with the Shostakovich Symphony, we thought, what happens if we work in miniature in cardboard and film our sets the way we would a model for a theatre? And then started thinking about puppets, cardboard puppets. And then what happens if you take your cardboard puppets and use those as the basis of thinking about costumes for actors? So what we were doing in Luxembourg was testing this out. The costume designer Greta Goris and her assistants had made some cardboard prototypes of costumes in Brussels. In Johannesburg, I had made some photostats and paintings of heads of the characters we wanted in this piece: Soviet people, Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, Mayakovsky, Shostakovich, Lily Brick, Elmira Nazirova, and brought these quite big cardboard photostats and paintings. And we simply held these in front of the cardboard costumes and tried to see, how do they work? How do the costumes work, and how do the personages work? Does it work if you don't see a human face, but just a photograph? But because we had such fantastic performers also with us for those 2 days, who were there for the Sibyl, we were able to make a lot of progress in 2 days, and it's a very rich way of working. So now we have to wait till September, when everybody gathers again in my studio in Johannesburg, if the third wave of COVID in South Africa calms down a bit. At the moment, it would be foolish to have 20 people together in the studio, but if it's calmed down by then, or more people are vaccinated, then we'll have a workshop with, 15 people in the studio, filming it and taking it further.
So what we're going to see...
energy that comes out of it, it's, it's a kind of, not a nuclear reactor, but you get a lot more energy out of it than you start with at the beginning.
So what we're going to see now is just the very beginning of a new project.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
On peut avoir le troisième film, s'il vous plaît? William?
Yeah.
So this is the very first seed of a whole new development.
I think so. I mean, you saw two things there. You saw the cardboard models, which are just cardboard and photostats and photographs stuck together with a phone camera or a small camera moving through them as a way of making the sets. And then both miniature puppets, small puppets that are about this big, and then people in their cardboard costumes. But it's a kind of a strange world that I think we are starting to make there, and I'm intrigued to know what it will be, both for the Shostakovich Symphony, but also as another language to work with on a separate project in its own right.
This is not the first time you've worked with the Russia of that period, notably working with Gogol, the Nose, in the Shostakovich opera, and many other times as well. I think if I ask you whether there is a link between your attraction for this period and the apartheid situation in South Africa, you might say not directly. Am I right?
I might say not directly, but there is a connection. There's not a direct connection, but one has to understand, I mean, it's in South Africa there was, no, in the United States and America, after the Second World War, there was an interest in abstraction. It felt the only way for art to develop was in this very formalist way of American New York color field painting. And I needed to find, in the South African context where politics and day-to-day politics was so unavoidable, what are the directions that modernism followed which do not abandon the world and get locked only into the subject of making art itself. And there were different ones. There was the Neue Sachlichkeit in Germany, artists like Max Beckmann, and the Expressionists, but there was also the extraordinary flowering of art in Russia and then the Soviet Union from 1910 till 1930. And it both had to do with artists who were completely entranced and energized by the society and the politics around them. It had to do with the utopian hope that the world could be transformed at that stage. So there were many things in writers, Mayakovsky, in the constructivist artists, in the way in which art went out of the studio into society and back, that intrigued me as a person working in a situation that was not the same as the Soviet Union at all, but one in which it was impossible to not be interested in the political around one.
Yes. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions? Très bien.
Yes, you told us about the energy you get from the collaboration with people, but could you tell us some more about the method which is yours? What is a typical William Kentridge day? Do you tell yourself, I must read, I must draw 1 hour, 2 hours a day? How do you get all these things you make with your method?
Okay, it's not so much that I'll say today, this 1 hour is for drawing, this 1 hour is for reading, this hour is for doing it, but over a period, maybe over 2 weeks, I will know that I have to get ready for the workshop that's coming up with the performers arriving. So I need to spend time on the heads of those characters that we're going to work on. So even though I'm in the middle of painting some trees, I know I have to stop that now and work for this period on this. I know I have to have some text ready for us to start thinking about in the film. So I'll say, all right, this weekend I'll work on finding bits of text, and then during the week I'm going to work on the heads. And so it does get divided into a sense of what are the projects. In the studio where we sort of have a meeting, there are maybe 8 or 9 people connected to the studio, 5 of them in the office, looking after the database, doing the logistics of shipping and getting pictures photographed and in databases. And then there are 2 people who work on engineering, making, if I need big megaphones, I'll make megaphones, and then there are editors that work with it. And if I need help in the studio physically, lifting something up, shifting it. There's some, and we'll meet once a week, and we have a list of things which go from, it's called HMUG, which is things that are on the horizon, projects that we know they're happening in a year's time or 9 months' time. We can't forget about them, but they're not ready for work. Then there's the middle ground, projects which are underway, knowing I've got an exhibition in 4 months in Paris. I have to remember that those group of drawings need to be finished. And then we've got ones which are, these heads have to be ready for next week's workshop, urgent. And then there's one which is called P, for panic. This was supposed to be done today, and people are arriving to look at it, and we haven't started. So that has to be done that morning. And then G, when it's too late and they're gone. And so we go through this list each week of getting an overall shape of where we are with different projects. But then, of course, the list that is made gets abandoned because you start making a head and you think you're going to spend a day on it, but for 2 weeks you can't stop making these heads or working on them. Or this head suggests a set of etchings which may come out of them, and then I'll go and work in the print studio for 4 days. And so there are lists and there are ignoring of lists. I would say that's the way the work gets done. A route march, which gets abandoned, and a new one made, and that gets abandoned. It's as if you're following your navigation on your phone, but every turning it suggests you take it for 20 yards and then turn off to the side again, and it recalibrates.
C'était une très bonne question. William?
Yes, Dennis.
I feel this audience is going to saturate if we go on too much longer, but personally I could speak to you all night. But I think maybe this is a good moment to stop with this sense of your ebullient energies about to overflow. Are you, just by the way, are you working at the moment on your major retrospective at the Royal Academy in England?
I am. I have, in terms of the question, well, how do I spend my day? I gave myself a rule for the next 3 weeks that I'm not allowed to draw before lunchtime. I have to write some lectures, and I'd much rather be drawing than writing. But I'm not allowed to draw before lunchtime. I have to write my lectures.
I know you don't like showing off, but just tell us, what are the lectures, and tell us just a little bit about the Royal Academy before we end.
Okay, so the Royal Academy is this big exhibition venue in London. It's been running for a couple of 100 years. And I do an exhibition there at the end of next year. And so that is quite well prepared. Most of the work is done. There's still some to be done, but it's in good shape. But before that, also in Britain, in the beginning of the year, I do a series of 6 lectures, which are about what happens in the studio. How does one make sense? What is the studio? The studio is a place of making and of making sense. So those two things together. How does one think in a material? So there are lectures about that. And it's clear to me what one does in the studio, but it's not clear how one talks about it. How to keep it close to the ground, but not only a description of how to draw with charcoal. So I work on those are big projects that tick away, which I need to keep on the track as they get closer.
Okay, good. I think we will leave you there in the Lake District in England, and we will return to Perpignan here.
Great.
Thank you so much for being with us, William.
Good. I'm sorry not to have had the occasion to speak French.
We're sorry that you weren't actually here with us, William, but never mind. It'll happen another time.
Great.
Okay. Goodbye then.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.